The grand palace of Thalra gleamed in the soft light of the twin moons above. It was the night of the royal ball, an event that had drawn the most powerful beings from across the galaxy. Nobles, dignitaries, and admirals all gathered in their finest attire, eager to see who would win the heart of Princess Leora, heir to the mighty Thalran throne. The anticipation was thick in the air as whispers traveled from one person to another, speculating on who would be chosen. But Princess Leora was not like other princesses. She had always been different. From a young age, she had been groomed to lead the galaxy, a powerful and decisive ruler. Her mind was sharp, her spirit unyielding. She was not swayed by the typical courtship rituals, nor did she find herself interested in the usual flattery and promises of wealth. Those who had tried to win her favor in the past quickly learned that she could not be easily impressed. The ballroom was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of clinking glasses as the first suitor, a tall, broad-shouldered noble from the Voltar system, approached her. His eyes glinted with confidence as he approached, his smile broad and his voice smooth. "Your Highness," he began, bowing low before her, "I offer my devotion to you, and in exchange I will ensure that your reign is prosperous beyond measure. My fleet stands ready to do whatever it takes to expand the power of Thalra." Princess Leora looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. She had heard this speech before. She had heard it from countless others, each one more self-serving than the last. She gave him a slight nod, her expression betraying no emotion.
"Thank you for your offer, but it is not what I seek."
"I understand, Your Highness. Perhaps I can offer you something more personal? My name carries weight, and with it influence and access to the wealth of my world." The princess remained silent for a moment, her gaze unwavering. "And yet you offer only what others have before you." "There is nothing new here?" With that, she dismissed him with a flick of her hand. The noble's face turned red with embarrassment, but he quickly stepped back and retreated into the crowd. The second suitor, a younger man from the Andromeda sector, took his place. He had heard the rumors about the princess's coldness, but he was determined to win her favor. His approach was more subtle, more charming. He spoke of adventures, of grand journeys across the stars, and the knowledge he had gained from distant worlds. His words were sweet, his gestures smooth, but the princess listened with no more interest than she had to the first suitor. "I have traveled far and wide, Your Highness," he said, his voice laced with excitement. "I have seen the wonders of the universe, and I could share those experiences with you, if you would allow me to be your partner." Princess Leora's expression did not change. "You speak of your travels as if they make you unique, but in truth, every noble in this room has seen the wonders you describe. There is nothing new in your words." The man's face grew pale, and he too was dismissed. He lingered for a moment, casting one last hopeful glance at the princess, but she turned away, signaling the end of their conversation. As the night wore on, more suitors came and went, each offering something, whether it was wealth, power, or the promise of adventure. But each time, Princess Leora remained unmoved. Her cold, impassive expression never wavered, no matter how grand the offer. The room grew uncomfortable, the guests whispering amongst themselves, wondering what kind of suitor could possibly capture the princess's attention. It wasn't that Leora was unkind. She was simply uninterested in the games of power that others played. She had been raised to rule, not to be wooed by words and gifts. She had seen the manipulation behind the smiles and the promises, and it disgusted her. Every suitor that came before her seemed to view her as little more than a prize to be claimed. Their offers were never genuine, always aimed at furthering their own ambitions. Despite the ever-growing line of suitors, Princess Leora's mind wandered. She had been trained in the art of diplomacy, strategy, and leadership, but she had never been prepared for this. The thought of choosing a partner, someone who would share in the responsibility of ruling the galaxy, was a daunting one. What kind of person could she trust? Who could she count on to stand by her side, not for the sake of personal gain, but because they truly believed in her vision? And then, in the corner of the room, she saw him. He was not like the others. Daniel, a human diplomat, stood off to the side, observing the spectacle with quiet detachment. His posture was relaxed, but his presence was undeniable. He was not here to make a show of himself. He had no grand speeches, no promises of power or wealth. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. Leora's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than she intended. He wasn't wearing the elaborate robes or jeweled armor that the other suitors had donned. His clothes were simple, practical, just the attire of someone who had come to fulfill a diplomatic duty. But there was something about him that intrigued her. He stood apart from the crowd, not seeking attention, not trying to impress anyone. He simply existed in the space, and yet, in that simplicity, he seemed more genuine than any of the others. As the night continued, Leora found herself watching him more and more. His calmness was a stark contrast to the restless energy of the room. It was as if he were untouched by the politics that swirled around him. He did not try to win her favor, nor did he offer anything in exchange for her attention. He was just there. The more she observed him, the more she felt a strange pull. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the way that the other suitors had tried to kindle it. No, it was something different. It was respect. She respected the quiet strength he exuded, the way he stood apart from the chaos, unmoved and unbothered by the politics around him. And so, when the last suitor finished his pitch and the ballroom seemed to hold its breath in expectation, Princess Leora did something that no one had anticipated. Without a word, she gestured toward Daniel. The room fell into a stunned silence as everyone turned to see what had just happened. Leora's eyes were fixed on Daniel, her gaze intense. The music slowed to a halt, and the guests whispered frantically, their shock palpable. Daniel stood still for a moment, unsure if he had heard correctly. But when he saw the princess's unwavering gaze, he knew. He knew that he had been singled out, not because of power, wealth, or influence, but because of something far more elusive. Princess Leora had chosen him, not with words, not with promises, but with a simple gesture. And in that moment, Daniel's heart raced. He had never been a part of such a grand game before. He had never been a part of anything like this. But there he was, standing in the midst of it all, the silent human who had caught the eye of the galaxy's most powerful princess. The ball was far from over, but everything had just changed. The ballroom was still, every eye fixed on Princess Leora and the silent human diplomat, Daniel. The air had thickened with tension, and for the first time that night, a quiet curiosity replaced the murmurs and whispers. Guests who, moments before, had been consumed with the excitement of competing for the princess's attention, now looked on in stunned disbelief. Daniel stood motionless, unsure of what to do. The entire room had been waiting for him to make his move, but he wasn't sure what was expected of him. He wasn't one for grand gestures or the kind of political maneuvering that had filled the room earlier. He was a simple man, a diplomat sent to manage peaceful relations between humans and the other species of the galaxy. And yet, here he was, caught in the center of something that seemed far beyond his understanding. Princess Leora's gaze was unyielding. She had already made her choice. With just one gesture, she had turned the entire ball upside down. The other suitors, now forgotten, stood in the background, their faces red with embarrassment or fury. Leora, the princess who had turned away every suitor without hesitation, had pointed to Daniel. Her action had stripped them of their dignity, leaving them confused and humiliated. The princess's choice baffled the onlookers. Daniel was not one of the grand noblemen or influential warriors they had expected her to favor. He wasn't even a man of high rank. He was a human, a species considered less advanced by many in the galaxy. He wore simple clothing, nothing like the elaborate robes and armor worn by the suitors who had been rejected. He didn't offer power, wealth, or influence. He simply stood there, observing, waiting. The whispers started. Some guests speculated that the princess had been moved by his quiet nature, that his silence had caught her attention in a way no words could. Others believed that it was simply a political move, a message to the other suitors that they weren't as important as they thought. Whatever the reason, the attention was now entirely on Daniel. The princess moved forward, her regal presence commanding the room. She walked toward him slowly, and the guests watched, their eyes following every step she took. The music resumed, but it was now a quiet, somber melody that seemed to mirror the shift in the atmosphere. Daniel didn't know what to expect, but when Leora reached him, she said nothing at first. She only studied him with her piercing gaze, as though measuring him, weighing him in a way that no one had ever done before. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Her expression was unreadable, and Daniel, though anxious, remained still, not daring to break the silence. Finally, after what seemed like an endless pause, Leora spoke. Her voice was low, but there was an authority in it that left no room for doubt. "You," she said simply. "You will be my challenge." The words sent a ripple through the crowd. A challenge? What did she mean? For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The tension in the room grew thicker, and Daniel's heart raced. He had not prepared for this, nor did he fully understand what she was asking of him. Leora continued, her voice steady and clear. "I've seen countless suitors come before me, all offering something they think I need: power, wealth, influence. But none of them understood what I truly seek. You stand before me, silent, and yet you speak without words. You have nothing to offer, and that is why you are different." Daniel stood frozen, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Was she mocking him? Testing him? Or was this something else entirely? His eyes flipped to the other suitors, who stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the princess's sudden shift. No one had ever challenged her like this. No one had ever dared. The princess's gaze softened, but there was no sign of humor or kindness in her eyes, only a deep, calculating intelligence. She turned her attention back to Daniel, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "You will face the court's trials," she said. "You will remain silent, and you will show me what you are capable of. If you can endure, if you can survive the games and prove that you are worthy of my trust, then you will be considered. But if you fail, if you falter in the slightest, you will be dismissed, just like the others." The challenge was set. There was no turning back now. Daniel wasn't sure what to say or do. He had come to this ball with the intention of simply fulfilling his diplomatic duties and observing the politics of the galaxy. He had never intended to become a part of the royal court's games. But now, as he stood before Princess Leora, he realized that the path ahead of him was uncertain, and that his silence might be the only thing that could help him survive. Leora turned and addressed the guests, her voice ringing out in the large hall. "This is my decision," she declared. "We will see if this human, who has nothing to offer but silence, can endure the trials that await him. Let it be known that he is not the typical suitor. He is something different. Perhaps that is what the galaxy needs." As she spoke, Daniel's mind raced. He had no desire for power, no interest in becoming a part of the royal court. But he understood the importance of his position now. The princess had given him a chance, an opportunity to prove something. Not just to her, but to everyone in the room. The room erupted into hushed conversation once more. There was disbelief, shock, and confusion. The idea that someone like Daniel, a simple human, could survive the trials of the Thalran court seemed impossible. But Leora's decision had been made, and there was no way to take it back. For the first time since entering the palace, Daniel felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. This was something far greater than he had ever imagined. The princess moved to the side, gesturing for the royal guards to step forward. They were there to oversee the trials and ensure that no one was given special treatment. Daniel knew that the trials would be difficult, but he wasn't sure what exactly he was up against. The court's games were legendary, filled with intrigue, manipulation, and tests of strength, intelligence, and loyalty. He had no idea how he would survive. But one thing was clear: he was not going to back down. Not now. Not when he had come this far. Leora stepped back and gave Daniel one last look, her expression unreadable. "We will begin tomorrow," she said, her voice final. "Prepare yourself." As the guests began to leave the ballroom, murmurs of excitement and curiosity filled the air. Daniel stood alone in the center of the room, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze upon him. He was now the center of attention, the person everyone would watch with bated breath. The princess had chosen him, and now he had to prove himself worthy. But he wasn't sure if he could. He had never been tested like this before. The trials ahead of him would be grueling, but one thing he knew for sure was that he wasn't going to let this chance slip away. The silent human had been chosen, and he would not fail. The following day, Daniel found himself standing outside the grand hall of the royal palace. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sun, already high in the sky, cast a sharp, unrelenting light on the polished stone floors of the palace courtyard. Daniel stood alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind racing. He had spent the night awake, reflecting on everything that had led him to this moment. Yesterday, he had been thrust into the heart of something far beyond his expectations. The princess had chosen him, not because of his power, his wealth, or his name, but because of his silence, a silence that had captivated her, a silence that had made him stand apart from the other suitors who had all sought to win her favor with promises and grand gestures. But now, standing in the palace courtyard, Daniel wondered what would come next. The challenge that the princess had spoken of was no small matter. He was a diplomat, not a soldier or a strategist. He had never faced trials of political manipulation or battles of physical strength. He had lived his life avoiding conflict, preferring the quiet negotiation of words over the bloodshed of war. Yet here he was, about to face a test that would not only challenge his body and mind, but his very character. The palace doors creaked open, and a group of royal guards appeared, each one clad in armor that gleamed under the sunlight. They moved in perfect unison, their steps measured and synchronized. The leader of the guards, a tall, imposing figure, stepped forward and gave Daniel a hard look. "You are to follow us," the guard said. His voice was stern, unyielding. "The trials are about to begin." Daniel nodded quietly, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew he had no choice but to follow. He couldn't turn back now, not when the princess had given him this chance. The guards led him down a long hallway, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The air inside the palace was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the previous night's ball. Finally, they arrived at a large chamber, its walls adorned with intricate tapestries depicting battles, royal ceremonies, and scenes of Thalra's history. The floor was made of smooth marble, and in the center of the room stood a raised platform. The princess was already there, standing with her back to him, her long dark hair cascading down her back in soft waves. She turned as Daniel entered, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "Welcome, Daniel," she said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Today you will prove whether your silence has meaning. These trials will test you in ways you cannot anticipate. Your goal is simple: survive. Show me that you are worthy of my trust, and you may walk away with more than just my respect."
The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Daniel wasn't sure if he was ready.
But as the princess's gaze remained steady, he knew he had no other choice. He had to face this, and he had to do it without speaking a word. His silence had already brought him this far. Now it would have to carry him the rest of the way. A low horn sounded, signaling the start of the trials. One by one, The doors to the chamber opened, revealing several other individuals standing in the doorway. They were not suitors, but participants chosen by the royal court to test Daniel's resolve. They were strangers to him, but their expressions were all the same: cold, determined, and ready for the challenge ahead. The first trial began immediately. 2 guards stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a large wooden chest. They placed it in front of Daniel, and the princess gestured to it. Inside this chest are various objects. Some will help you, others will hinder you. You must open the chest, find the item that will aid you, and use it to complete the task ahead.
You may only take 1 item. Choose wisely.
Daniel stood silently for a moment, studying the chest. He could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him, but he didn't let it distract him. He had learned long ago that action spoke louder than words. Slowly, he approached the chest, his fingers brushing over the wood. He lifted the lid, revealing a pile of objects inside. There were weapons, tools, and strange devices he didn't recognize. His eyes scanned the items quickly, looking for anything that might give him an advantage. There were knives, ropes, and even a set of strange crystals that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. But there was one item that stood out, a small, simple key. It seemed harmless enough, but something about it caught his attention. The key was old, weathered, and appeared to fit into something he couldn't quite place. Daniel reached for the key, carefully taking it from the chest. The room fell silent as everyone watched him. He held the key in his hand, feeling its weight, and then turned to face the princess. Leora nodded approvingly, though her expression remained neutral. "Very well," she said. "You have made your choice. Now follow the path ahead. The key will unlock your next trial." Without a word, Daniel turned and began to walk down the path that had been set before him. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in around him as he moved forward, the tension in the air growing thicker with each step. He could hear the soft echoes of his footsteps, but nothing else. The silence was profound, almost suffocating. The path led him to a second chamber, much smaller than the first, and in the center stood a locked door. Daniel stepped forward and approached it, the key still in his hand. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it, the mechanism clicking open with a satisfying sound. The door swung open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The princess's voice echoed from behind him. "Go ahead, Daniel. You will face the next trial alone. You must rely on your instincts, your silence, and your wit." "There will be no assistance." Daniel took a deep breath and stepped through the door. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him. The air was thick with the smell of dust and earth, and the light was dim, casting long shadows across the floor. He moved cautiously, each step measured, his senses heightened. The trial ahead was not clear, but he could feel it in his gut. There was something here, something waiting. His mind raced as he scanned the surroundings, looking for any clue, any sign of what he was supposed to do. There were no guards, no instructions, only the oppressive silence that had followed him throughout the palace. Suddenly, he heard a soft rustling sound behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there. His heart beat faster, but he remained still, refusing to be distracted. The silence was his ally. It would be his guide. Ahead, he saw something glint in the shadows. Cautiously, he moved toward it. As he approached, he realized it was a small chest, similar to the one he had encountered earlier. But this chest was different. This one seemed to be calling to him, as if it were waiting for him to open it. Daniel's fingers brushed against the chest, and as he lifted the lid, he saw that it was empty. But just as quickly as the realization hit him, the room around him began to shift. The walls seemed to move, the floor beneath him groaning as if it were alive. He stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The trial was not about the chest. It was about what was happening now. He had to think quickly. The ground beneath him cracked open, revealing a series of twisting, moving passages that stretched out in all directions. The only way forward was to choose a path. Daniel paused, allowing the silence to wash over him. He couldn't rely on anything but his instincts. His silence had been his strength thus far, and it would guide him now. With a steady hand, he chose one of the paths and moved forward. As he ventured deeper into the passageways, he knew that the trials had only just begun. He would face many more challenges, each one more difficult than the last. But one thing was clear. No matter what came next, he was determined to face it with the same silence that had brought him here. The passage grew narrower with each step Daniel took. The air around him felt thicker, almost oppressive. The walls seemed to close in, the once smooth surface now jagged and uneven. It was as though the palace itself was trying to test him, pushing him to his limits. He had learned to rely on his silence, but now, in the dim light of the twisting corridors, even that seemed like it might not be enough. His footsteps echoed in the narrow hallways, the sound of his own movement almost deafening in the stillness. The path was becoming more labyrinthine, and Daniel had to remain alert. Each turn he made seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the trial, into something that was much more than just a physical challenge. This was a test of his endurance, his mind, and his very spirit. As he rounded another corner, he saw something ahead. A soft flickering light illuminated the far end of the corridor, casting long shadows on the walls. For a moment Daniel hesitated. What lay beyond that light? Was this the next trial, or was it something else entirely? The silence around him felt suffocating, but he knew he had no choice but to continue. He took a deep breath and moved forward, his senses heightened, his every step measured. The light grew brighter as he drew nearer, and the soft hum of energy filled the air. He rounded the corner and came upon a large chamber. The light he had seen before was emanating from a strange device at the center of the room. It was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The device hummed with an otherworldly energy, and as he stepped closer, he could feel the pull of its power. At the far end of the chamber stood Princess Leora. She was standing still, her gaze fixed on him, her expression unreadable. The guards who had accompanied him through the trials were nowhere to be seen. It was just Daniel and the princess now, alone in the room. The silence was almost unbearable, but it wasn't the same as before. This silence felt charged with meaning, as though the weight of the entire galaxy was resting on this moment.
"You've made it this far," Leora's voice rang out, clear and commanding.
"But this is the final trial, Daniel. This is where your true test begins. To succeed here, you must face not only the trials of the mind and body, but the trials of the heart." Daniel stood silently, listening intently. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this moment was different. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about something deeper, something that required more than just endurance. The princess motioned toward the device. "This machine will give you the opportunity to confront your deepest fears, your most painful memories. You will face them head on. But know this: you cannot hide. You cannot escape. If you choose to face it, you must do so with your full heart and your full silence." Daniel's heart raced. Fear. Pain. He had always avoided confronting the darker parts of his past. His career as a diplomat had been about moving forward, never looking back. But now, there was no way around it. The trial would force him to face what he had spent years trying to forget. "Do you understand the consequences of this trial?" Leora asked, her voice softer now, though still strong. Daniel nodded. He couldn't speak, not now. His silence had brought him this far, and it was the only thing he had left to offer. But he knew, deep down, that this trial would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Without another word, he stepped toward the device. As he approached, the room around him seemed to shift. The walls began to fade, replaced by a series of images, flashbacks, memories, each one more vivid than the last. The machine hummed louder now, its energy swirling around him. The first image was of a planet, a quiet, peaceful place where Daniel had once lived. It had been home until the war. He remembered the sounds of explosions, the screaming, the destruction. He had been just a child at the time, too young to understand the full scale of what was happening. But he remembered the fear, the feeling of helplessness, as everything he knew was torn apart. The next memory was of a battle. He wasn't a soldier, but he had been caught in the crossfire. He had seen people die, people he had known, people he had once called friends. He had been there, watching, unable to do anything to stop it. The memory burned in his mind, a reminder of his own impotence in the face of violence. As the images continued to flash before him, Daniel's chest tightened. He saw the faces of those he had lost, the people whose deaths had haunted him for years. Each memory was more painful than the last. It was as though the machine was pulling the very essence of his soul to the surface, forcing him to relive the trauma he had buried so deep inside. But in the midst of the chaos, there was something else, a faint light, flickering at the edge of his consciousness. It was hope, a glimmer of it, barely noticeable at first. It was a reminder of who he had become since those days, of the peace he had fought for, the lives he had saved, and the quiet strength he had found in his own silence. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not falter. He stood tall, letting the memories wash over him. He did not speak. He did not scream. He only breathed, steady and calm, refusing to let the fear control him. The silence had always been his strength, and now, in this moment, it became his shield. He did not need to speak, to fight his demons. The memories began to fade, and the machine's hum grew quieter. The room returned to its original form, and Daniel found himself back in the chamber, standing before Princess Leora. She was watching him closely, her expression still unreadable. "You have faced your fears," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You did not speak, not once. You stood firm even when the darkness threatened to swallow you whole." Daniel remained silent, but his heart felt lighter. The trial was over, and he had survived. He had faced his past, confronted the pain, and come out the other side stronger. He had done it without the need for words. Leora stepped forward, her gaze softening. "You have proven yourself, Daniel, not because of what you offer in terms of power or wealth, but because of what you've shown in your silence. You have shown that you are more than just a diplomat, more than just a human. You are a person of strength, of integrity, and of resolve." She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of respect, something he had not expected from the royal family.
"You have earned my trust," she said quietly.
"And you have earned a place by my side." Daniel stood still, his heart filled with a quiet pride. He had entered this palace as a mere diplomat, unsure of his place in the grand scheme of things. But now, as he stood before the princess, he knew that he had found something far more valuable than power or influence. He had found his purpose. The silence that had defined him throughout the trials was no longer a barrier. It was his strength. And in that strength, he had won not just the princess's respect, but something far deeper, a connection that transcended words. As the final trial ended, Daniel knew that his journey had only just begun, but for the first time, he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that his silence, his unwavering resolve, would carry him through.